I'm Chris Farrell from the All Things Good and Nerdy podcast, a wacky weekend morning show, part of the Gonna Geek Network, just like the show you're checking out right now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and the opinions expressed may not reflect others. Show, part of the Gonna Find other awesome geeky shows over at GonnaGeekNetwork.com.
Welcome to an all-new Better Podcasting live chat. I am Stargate Pioneer, co-host Stephen John Drew, and with me, of course, is Stargate Pioneer.
Call me SP, and then you don't have to worry about your little flub right there. We have our Better Podcasting live chat. We do it every other week. It's us, unfiltered, raw, and sometimes it's difficult to listen to Stephen, but that's like every week anyway. So anyway, this is the Better Podcasting live chat where we talk just off the cuff about our week in podcasting. So Stephen, I mentioned something a couple weeks ago on this show, and then I reiterated it on the main show last week about my Sony MDR 7506 studio monitoring headphones. The ear cups had disintegrated on it, and I got these wicked cool cushions to replace these. Yes, these, which you have termed to be the same as a 10-year-old faux leather chair.
Yeah, which is, I stand by that description.
Yeah, that's really tasty right there. Anyway, just wanted to show
never mind. I didn't comment about what it would smell like, okay?
Well, I mean, it conjures up some imagery, right? So I just wanted to show our viewers what the new wicked cushions look like on the MDR 7506. So if you're on a video side of things, you're seeing these. I did use these twice. They do have a slightly different tone to them because they're just, I don't know if it's the distance to the ear, maybe it's the isolation is a little bit different. I'm not exactly sure why. It's a little bit different. I can't quantify the difference yet, but it doesn't leave the flakes on my face. So I'm good with it.
So it's the flakeless edition.
At least for now. I'm sure in like another 3 to 5 years, it'll flake out too. But it was a $20 fix and they work just fine. So that's all I wanted to say is they are on now, and I will report back, I guess, after I use them a little bit more.
When are you going to use them?
Well, I use them as secondary monitoring from my studio, and these that I'm wearing right now monitor straight from the Zoom H6. So they don't monitor from the Mackie Pro FX 16 V2. So I have these secondary ones that monitor from the Mackie mixer itself.
For editing and stuff, or?
Yeah, for editing or for when I don't have the Zoom on, because the Zoom doesn't have to be on all the time. And the Zoom is not stereo either, unless I input it into two different things and pan it left and right into stereo mode. So if I want to listen to something stereo, I got to listen from the Mackie.
Okay, fair enough. I gotcha. And yeah, you don't want to go have to unplug that and plug that in all the time. Yeah, that sucks. Well, that's cool. I'm sorry, though, to hear that you use the crappier headphones on your editing, because I like the Shure's better. Not that I've ever used them, but I like to take shots against the Sonys when I can.
Well, I do use these from time when my Zoom is on. I do use them for editing, but really what I use for editing are my studio monitoring speakers, which we talked about before, that I just refreshed, the JBLs, the 5-inch JBLs monitors. That's what I use for editing.
Okay, fair enough. All right, well, we're talking about your equipment already, so let's continue talking about your equipment. And you have a bit of an update about your whole problem that you had recently. This was the situation where he's described it, if you forget what it was. Basically, he was having weird distortions come into his recording on occasion, but it was more than his recording. It was everything. He heard it. We heard it, like if he was connected through OBS Ninja. Everybody basically heard these weird distortions, and you laid out a plan of how you're going to try to eliminate the problem, go through and diagnose, and you have maybe found what it was.
Well, yeah. So I said, I believe it was 2 weeks ago, I said I moved my input from channel 2 to channel 3. So my microphone is going into a DBX 286X, and it's going out of that DBX into originally channel 2 on the Mackie Pro FX 16 V2. And then it goes out USB into the computer, and that's how you are hearing me right now live. But I do have a auxiliary send 1 that goes into my Zoom H6 that I'm able to hear myself in. And I also have headphones out through a splitter going into another channel. That's how I'm able to hear you as I'm monitoring my Zoom H6. Well, I had some audio distortions going on. So the first thing that I did, because it was easier, was, well, I did make sure that the cable was actually plugged in. And then after I did that and it was still messing around, I took the cable and I took it out of channel 2 and I put it in channel 3. And the audio distortion is gone. It was intermittent. It wasn't all the time. It wasn't a low hum or anything. It was just a distortion. It just like a squeak or squawk came up from time to time. So that is no longer there. I haven't noticed it in my recording. Stephen, you haven't said anything in 2 weeks. So that to me means that channel 2 on my Mackie Pro FX 16 V2 is bad, which means I am now the proud owner of a Mackie Pro FX 15 V2.
Right. Yes, that makes sense because one of the channels is bad. And you're assuming it's only one channel. You don't know. It could be more. So it could be a 14 V2.
It could be, but I haven't noticed anything on any of the other channels, which includes my soundboard and anything else that I'm playing through my speakers. I've used everything. Like I have my Amazon A Word that's plugged in through one of the channels. I have my I could put my iPod in another channel. So I have all these channels that are being used. And I haven't noticed anything wrong with any of the other channels. The one channel that I haven't tried is channel 1, which is actually the third in-studio microphone that wasn't hooked up to a DBX. It is DBX less. So if I have a third person that is cramped in this little closet, it would have to be through a dynamic microphone because it doesn't have any sort. You know what? That would be a great use of an MD46. I would probably use the Rode Procaster. On one, I would use my Electro Voice RE320 on my channel, and then I would use the Sennheiser MD46 or one of them that I have on the other channel. And that's probably what my in-studio setup would be, but I've never had that opportunity, nor do I think I want one. It would get really hot in here. It's small.
You know what you should just do? Just use only lav mics into an iRig into your brand new phone that you have, and then you got nothing, no hardware at all.
I do want one of those new iRig, what is it, iRig Duos or something like that. I do want one because then I could use an iPad or my new iPhone Pro Max, iPhone 12 Pro Max to do some podcasting, which do you want to go ahead and talk about that right now too?
Yeah, that was my way to segue into
You were
it.
just segueing in. So I did get a iPhone 12 Pro Max. I ordered it when it was first available to order on November 6, 2020. It came in the mail on November 13th, 2020. We actually recorded a whole segment about my setup of it last night on the GonnaGeek.com show. I won't go into that. So that is episode 354, I believe, and will be out later on this week. So a couple days after we're recording this. If you're listening to this in the future, it's already out. So I have this. It's great. And for podcasting, I have downloaded the Overcast app. And well, I transferred it from my other phone, but the problem was none of the data transferred. So it had to re-download the 80 gigabytes worth of podcast data that's on there that I just have that I haven't listened to or stuff that I want to keep or something like that, which took all of Saturday to download. I'll spare everybody with the story, but that actually works now. The Overcast app works great. I've used it already. That's it. I haven't used it for any other podcasting whatsoever. I use the camera a little bit, been playing around with that a little bit in video and in the still pictures, but I have not done anything with podcasting. As soon as I do, I'll let everybody know. I did port all my podcasting apps over. So I have stuff like Backpack Studio over there. I have Twisted Wave. I have all the iOS apps that I previously had on my other iPhone on there. I just haven't had a chance to use them. So basically that's it. By the way, Stephen, before we go any further, I want to comment to Betsy, who posted in our chat. She said, "Hi, glad to be here. Not just a lurker. Love your podcast and trying to get up the courage to start one. I've only been thinking about it for 18 months now." Honestly, Betsy, if you go back and listen to my story of how I got into podcasting, it took me about 3 or 4 years to get going podcasting. So 18 months is pretty good.
And I won't name names, but I'll say in our chat room, we have a bunch of other people, including someone else who has been thinking about starting their podcast for a while now. We'll go ahead and not name names, but if you would like to go ahead and respond in the chat, you can go ahead and give that reassurance, Mr. Somebody Pennington. You can go ahead and put that in there.
Calling him out. Yeah. I did mention, I believe 2 weeks ago, that I was excited to hear his episode 1. So Johnny, what's the URL to that? Just link it in the chat and we'll send it out to everybody else. Be grateful to listen to that.
No, seriously, it's okay if you delay your podcast. Obviously, you want to make sure that you launch on time or launch eventually, but you got to get it right. But you also got to make sure you don't just drag your heels on and on and on and on and come up with excuses where you're just stopping yourself. But I think that it is okay. You know, if you're not comfortable, you're not comfortable. It can be a lot of work. We've talked about that. And sometimes you have excellent ambitions of starting something and then life changes and you no longer can. And that's okay. As a hobby podcaster, you got to be having fun. That's number one priority.
Absolutely.
And by the way, in the chat, Johnny Pennington does say, I know. He knew where I was going with that.
I kind of closed it off really quick with the iPhone 12 update, but basically I want to know from our audience and our live chat audience, if you guys want to chime in, do you guys use your phone for anything directly for your podcast? Do you record onto it? Do you edit? What do you use your phone for podcasting? Just let me know. I would love to know that, and I will test out whatever that is on my iPhone 12 if it fits into my workflow. I'll try that. And for our audience that's listening afterwards, please let us know. You know, hit us up on Twitter at BetterPod or come into our Discord at betterpodcasting.com/Discord and let us know what you use your phone for podcasting. And that is a great data set. Because Stephen, I don't think you use your phone for podcasting at all.
No, only for weird random scenarios. Like if I need to, when we're streaming, if I need to preview that the stream's going, I'll dig out my phone. If I'm away, I'll use it then. But like I hardly do anything with my podcast on my phone. So no, not me. You do bring up though something that I think nicely fits in here. You mentioned that you use Overcast to listen to your podcast, and you don't use the Apple Podcasts app, do you?
No, I don't. I do check our podcast there from time to time, predominantly, believe it or not, to see if somebody's left a review on Apple Podcasts, because that is legitimately Apple Podcasts. It's still iTunes on my computer, but it's Apple Podcasts on my phone. That's about the only reason that I pop into the podcast app.
Well, this is kind of on the heels too of last week on the Better Podcasting main show. I commented about how whether or not people want to admit it, Spotify is a big power player now in podcasting. And I think Apple might be feeling some of this pressure. You know, loyal Apple users like you, I call you loyal Apple user because you've used an iPhone for a long time and have tried the Apple Podcast app. And anyways, not everybody wants to use the Apple Podcast. And some people like Spotify are coming into their territory that Apple used to have. Well, I just read that apparently Apple Podcasts has made it so that you can now make a embed player on a web page. So basically you can now add an embed player to a website that will embed the podcast via Apple Podcasts. This is interesting because usually you could only embed something that was an Apple Podcast directly to the media file through your hosting provider, through, you know, one of the other services that were out there. But it looks like Apple has created an embed code now. I haven't had a chance to try this yet, but I think that this is really telling, in my opinion, because we were so closed with Apple Podcasts for so long. And you got things like Google coming in, making it really easy to have that sort of have podcasts on the internet routed through Google Podcasts. You got Spotify doing their thing. And now Apple's changing their way a little bit because ultimately their metrics and the metric set that they offer means nothing if they can't maintain a huge control of the podcast consumption. Because if they're only able to offer people's consumption history that is awful, that is through Apple Podcasts, and if all of a sudden only 15% of people listening to podcasts are listening through Apple Podcasts, that means nothing. Their data set is pretty much invaluable.
I was thinking about
not invaluable. It's useless. So
I was thinking about this as the Apple podcast sphere of direct listens goes down, and the increase in, like, say, Google architecture, Spotify, or one of the other locations where people listen to podcasts grow. Apple still has a direct impact on podcasting because of the API and all of the other podcast apps, such as Overcast, that they influence indirectly just because of the catalog that's available. Because the API has been open, which is a great thing that Apple's been doing. And so you have a bunch of different apps, both on the Android and on the iOS side, that pull from that API, and that they're able to have the catalog, the Apple Podcast catalog there. Now, I don't know if it's persistent and it continues, that the degradation of the Apple market share goes down, and I don't know what that's going to be. Is it 40%? Is it 10%? Is it 15%? Is it 25%? I don't know. But at some point in time, Apple's going to go, why are we putting all these resources into it where it's not giving us anything back, and we're such a small part of the market share? And at that point, they might decide to close it down, in which case I don't know where all these apps are going to get their directory from or pull from, because the way Google does it, there is no central database. Google, it's all based on the search criteria and the searchability of the header information on the website, which the podcast is hosted on. So I don't know how that's going to affect different apps. Are we going to go back to the era, which, Stephen, you remember, where you had to apply to about 15 different places in order for your podcast to be heard?
I think we're at that already, to be honest. I think that there is enough pull in enough directories that you now need to consider the multiple submissions again. I 100% think that we're already at that. And I say that because not everybody uses a media host or wants their media host, or possibly should allow their media host to submit it on their behalf. There's a whole bunch of questions in there. And even if you are using that, you are still having your media host submit to all of these places. So I think we're entirely back to that. And it's not just submit it to Apple anymore.
I don't think it ever really was. Even just a couple of years ago, it was like 3 different places at least that you'd want to send it to. Right now, it would say you'd want to send it to Apple Podcasts. You'd want to make it searchable. You don't send it. You'd want to make it searchable by Google, or what's it called? It's not searchable, but findable. I forget what the technical term is when you're making your podcast available for Google to index it.
Yeah, I forget what you call that too, but
indexing or whatever. Okay, so there's Google, and you have to make sure you're following by the rules, and it's not as instantaneous. It might take even a week or 2. You don't know, but eventually it'll pop up there. So that's to Spotify. I would make sure that you're in there. To a lesser extent, TuneIn. And that's off the cuff. Stephen, is there anywhere else that you would make sure that you would submit your show to today?
That's all that I can think of off the top of my head. But I think a few years ago, you could just have gotten away with Apple Podcasts and have been totally fine.
Well, true. iHeartRadio is another one, by the way.
It's questionable.
Well, the reason that I want to be on iHeartRadio is whenever I'm in the car with the girls and they're listening to the radio, and that's the only time I listen to the radio, by the way, is when the girls are in there. And seriously, it is. I've got my podcast. I've 80 gigabytes of podcasts to get through. I think I don't have to listen to the radio. So I'm listening to the radio, and I hear these commercials about how you can find the show on iHeartRadio. And I every single time I just turn to them. I'm on iHeartRadio. So, I could say that because I am on iHeartRadio.
That's fair. That's fair. I do that with my kids. They are obsessed with watching gamer YouTube videos. And I'm like, I'm on YouTube. I'm like, what? You're on YouTube? Yeah. That's what I do. I go on YouTube. All right. Well, that's a fun little conversation. I am looking forward, though, to seeing what happens with Apple Podcasts, and actually seeing how this embed thing works out, because there's a few good website creation platforms out there now that do a good job of integrating different ways to subscribe in a pretty dynamic manner. And I think this would be interesting to see if some of those start to adopt this embed code, so that you could go and add that in there. And, if you want to play it through, like, this is what I vision, is you have a theme that says play through, and someone can select how they're playing or whatever, right? So, and it would just be, you set that for your site. We will see. Also, there was an update with Pinecast. We've talked a little bit about Pinecast before. We've had some questions over the years about Pinecast, but this show here, Better Podcasting Live Chat, is hosted on Pinecast with a little asterisk on there with our RSS feed. We have that self-hosted, but it is though through Pinecast as well. The Gonna Geek Show is pseudo-hosted, and I say that because the media's on there, but because of the existing infrastructure at the time, it's mostly just a link to the URL. So there's less so use of the Pinecast, but we've got that on there.
Well, let's take a second to talk about that. A lot of people host their media on a media host, whether it's Podbean or Pinecast or Libsyn or wherever, right? So they're hosting their media on these places, and some of them do it to get the stats, the download stats from it, but some of them just do it so that the reliability is there and that they don't have to pay for it, and they don't bust their server for their website at all, and they host their RSS feed on their own. Now, there's certain things you have to do for that, and the RSS feed in some cases gets hit more. It's more data that runs through it than the actual file do. But so you have to watch out for that with your terms of service with your server, wherever you're hosting your RSS feed on your server or whatever. We have a lot more information on that on Better Podcasting episode 65, and it's talking about how to host your own media for your podcast and host your own RSS feed. It's two different things. But I just wanted to point that out for anybody that's listening new. That's what we're talking about, is you can use Podbean to host your media and your RSS feed. You can use Pinecast to do the same thing. You can use all these podcast media hosts to do that, but you can also use them just to host the files, the MP3 files, and then host your RSS feed somewhere else. And a lot of places do that. A lot of places that have professional podcasts or the podcast for business do that sort of thing for a lot of different reasons. Anyway, Stephen, go ahead.
No, that's a good point, and I'm glad you brought that all up. The long story short is Pinecast is pretty much, as far as I know, a one-person operation. There might be a couple in the background, but the main part of it is a one-person operation. I believe his name is Matt, and he's somebody that we've talked to in the past about Pinecast, and we followed Pinecast for a little while. And with Pinecast, one of the things that's been interesting for me is the reception to feedback. Now, back when we reviewed Pinecast a year or two ago, I had concerns over some of the things that were communicated versus what was actually being implemented. At the time, I felt like there was a lot of sort of, it's right around the corner sort of comments that we were seeing. And it wasn't just me. There was some other people in our Discord and that we talked through Better Podcasting that had a similar sort of experience where it seemed like things were always around the corner. And I know that there was a bit of issue that was taken with that. However, I am happy to say that, like, over the last year or so, I've seen a lot of change and a lot of evolution again with Pinecast. I've seen a lot of these things that seem to be right around the corner finally happen and more. And what their blog post, and the reason I give you this information is because when this was rolled out here, there's this new layout to Pinecast. The blog post was very transparent, and I liked that. And Matt admitted that the reason that this happened was because he had a customer who left his service because they really didn't like the layout, and that's what it bottom line came down with. And he said that stung, and he took the feedback and looked at it, and it was relevant, and he felt like it needed to be done. And he kind of gives a bit of backstory about how Pinecast sort of evolved from what was a project for a couple friends to being more mainstream. And I think that this layout has done a bang on job of what needed to be changed. It feels a lot more modernized. And I say that a little bit hesitantly because I think that Pinecast version 1 was way more modern than at least one mainstream provider out there, if not two that I can think of, but I won't name.
Which probably, I think I know the two that you're talking about, and they both have improved their back-end UIs, but in any case.
Yeah, and so I think that it was a really good UI before, but now it just seems even better because there's less buttons, less places to go to get to the different sections. There's sort of one main menu bar on the left to go through the different sections of that podcast. Like there's an overview, analytics, episode list, distribution, reviews, listener feedback. Essentially, you go into one of your podcasts that you're hosting with them, and you've just got this easy to access menu bar on the left side. And it makes it easy for you to hop from seeing the overview of your podcast into the actual detailed metrics. Or if you want, go to the full list of your episodes. Truthfully, one of the things that this UI change made me realize was that distribution thing that I mentioned a few minutes ago. I don't think that this is new. I think this is something they had before that I didn't realize, that they do have through Pinecast the ability for you to go in and find out how to easily, or they can, for some of them, submit your podcast to the directories if you want to do that. Again, we've talked about in the past, there's a bunch of question marks you should ask yourself before you have your media host submit. But I didn't even know they had that ability in there. And the fact that they've rearranged this layout highlighted to me the change. And I think that they did a good job. And the number one improvement that should always be there is here. In my opinion, it's faster. If you are making a UI improvement and you slow down your UI, failed by me. You get an instant F on that. You should always be trying to make your experience faster for your users, because that is the way, in my opinion, our society is operating. We want things now, and we continue to evolve in that, where we want the information now. We don't want it slower. So I think that if you go slower, I don't care what features you added, it's a failure. And this year feels faster.
That's an interesting input. Now, you're a techie and you know the back end stuff. And I would agree with that assessment, by the way, that you don't want to slow it down. But because systems get faster, internet speed gets faster, servers gets faster, I think they can make it more complex if they at least maintain the same speed as before. I think that would be a win, right?
Yeah.
And that's cool. And you get improvements and you don't get any additional delays. That's cool. I have a Pinecast account. It has been unused. To be honest, I got the $5 a month plan just to get in and be grandfathered on that. Ironically, I'm probably spending more money just waiting for to launch a podcast than I would have if I would have just gone in under the new pricing structure. But I had intended, it's 2020, folks. I had intended on doing another project this year, and that has fallen through because of 2020. Not that I don't have plans for something new in the future, but it is not happening right now. So I have not used my Pinecast account. The one thing that I will say against Pinecast that seems to be more and more prevalent in the industry, and Stephen, I think you'd agree with me here, is that they are not IAB podcast measurement standard compliant yet. They're not certified underneath that standard yet. I don't know if they're going for that or not. I would hope that they would. I mean, there is a lot of other competitors out there to Pinecast in their niche that have gotten approval from the IAB. So I would hope that eventually they would, and that would bring their statistics in line with just everybody else. And at that point, it's kind of a no-brainer to say, hey, look, if you want to pay a la carte, Pinecast is where it is.
I agree 100%. And that is one of the big holdups that would probably, at this moment here, they're going to get, like, I would recommend them with a bunch of caveats. And I've mentioned that before. And that is a big one there. And I have concerns about whether they will get it in the future. And that is a big problem for some people. So I hope they do eventually, because that would probably put them, for me, on the list of, I'll openly recommend them at this point, making sure you know that they're still relatively new. Because I think that there is concerns on the pricing model and things like that, but they've done a lot to offset that. And I've talked about that before, even on this show here, where they've really opened up some options to take more money, and people are using them. And I think that levels out the dollar figure a little bit more. And I think that there are a few players out there that, with the way things have evolved, might be charging a bit too much now. It was okay a few years ago, but I think it's a little too much now compared to where the industry is going. But I think that if you don't need the IAB certification or the IAB stats, and that's why we we really did that for this show here because we went, okay, this is a little venture we're going to try this year, see how it goes. We don't want to put too much money into it. Steven's already got a Pinecast account that he's trying. We want to give this a shot, speak better on it. Let's use this as a test bench. We don't need those certified stats. And that's why we put this show here on there, but still host the Better Podcasting main show on Libsyn, because ultimately this one here, we didn't necessarily need the certified stats. So
no.
But we do think we are both big advocates of the certified stats. And that is a big thing that we think that people should do. And honestly, it's another reason why I do self-host the RSS feed even for this show here, because that gives me the flexibility that if I want to ever do something in the middle of that to get those IAB for certified stats, like, start using that RSS feed, using it via a method that would give us those stats as a intermediate, I could do that because I'm not linking the Pinecast RSS feed elsewhere. That was one of the considerations we had when we decided to self-host the RSS feed for this show.
I used to have a Spreaker account. For the new listeners here, I used to have a Spreaker account. It was $20 a month. You had unlimited RSS feeds that you could use from that, and you could use the audio streaming function. So you had an audio streaming feed out there. Now with the invention of YouTube Live, and Twitch, and all the other video streaming platforms out there that make it possible, I don't think that audio streaming is really gonna give the bang for your buck for your podcast. So there was really no need for my Spreaker account anymore. And I did want to keep the ability to have an incubator for podcasts and to keep as many RSS feeds as I want. The detriment with Spreaker in that department is you could only keep 500 hours. And a lot of people on the hobbyist side were saying, well, 500 hours, how are you going to get there? Well, I did get there, and it was because I was doing so many shows over so many years. I got there really quickly, actually. I got there, I believe, within 2.5 or 3 years or something like that, which, okay, it took 2.5 or 3 years to get there. But once you get there, you're like, oh, man, I got to delete my original shows now to make more space for my other shows. And when you're doing certain shows, people want to go back to episode 1 and listen to your show from episode 1. So all things considered, the $20 a month for Spreaker, where I wasn't really using the audio streaming function anymore, and it was limited in the total amount of hours that I could store, versus Pinecast, where I would spend $5 a month instead of $20 a month and get unlimited RSS feeds, it was no brainer to go with Pinecast. And that is why I have a secondary account through Pinecast. All my other podcasts right now are hosted through Libsyn, full disclosure, but I am looking for other options. I would like to try Podbean. I would like to try Pinecast. Those are two off the cuff. And once I get a new show, we'll just see how those go. Anyway, I think we talked a lot about Pinecast here. I didn't want to run it into the ground. I did want to respond. I mean, we are a live chat show, folks. So if you are listening to us, come to geeks.live while we're recording. You can ask us questions. Betsy, who I mentioned before, she asked kind of a question here. She said, thanks. Being here really helps. I also need a new iPhone. She's using an iPhone 7. And my MacBook, it's showing its age at 5 years now. I'm stuck in paralysis by analysis mode, thinking my equipment's not good enough. And for that, Stephen, I would say, and I think we've said this before, you got to start. You just take what you got and you start. Get yourself a decent microphone. You know, if you can find the new ATR 2100X, that will work great with the MacBook.
There was an update later in the chat. Betsy actually managed to come across an AT2005. Right now, I know it's hard, and the reason we highlight this is because right now most of the microphones that we recommend are really hard to find. They're in high demand right now. So the AT2005, Betsy managed to get one of those. Now, my recommendation, if you're just doing a solo show on that, Betsy, my suggestion would be to just hook it up to the MacBook through USB. Download Audacity and hit record and see how it goes with you, because that will probably be relatively low resources if that's all you're doing. Don't run a bunch of other things if you can avoid it. Maybe have your notes up and that's it. And when you go and record a sample, do like a 30-minute sample, and then go and play it back and see if it sounds normal. Because if it sounds like it's suddenly cutting out, or you're hearing pops, or you're hearing crackles, or you're hearing a big dropout where you're half your word is gone, that means that probably, yeah, your computer is not going to keep up with the audio recording on a reliable basis. But if you find that that's overall working okay, simple USB microphone into a computer running Audacity shouldn't be too bad. It's once you start to connect with others and you try to now stream via Skype to somebody, connect that way, and do a whole bunch of other things that might start to get bogged down.
Along the conversation of microphones, Bangs Nutty Bits posted in the chat that he got his biweekly email from B&H that they still don't have the Samsung Q92, which was supposed to be a new microphone in 2020 that hasn't come out yet. We've addressed this on the main Better Podcasting show, and I asked about the Shure SM7, and there was a lot of chat back and forth about the SM7 and people thinking even the Samsung Q2U was better.
MV7.
Yes, the MV. Did I say SM7?
You did.
I meant the MV7, the new USB XLR dual microphone that's $250 from Shure that just came out a couple of weeks ago, and it's interesting hearing the feedback from that. I would actually be interesting in trying one out, but I don't think it would fit my use case. I think we talked about that before, right?
I want to try one for a few reasons. And one of the big reasons I would like to try it is because while I like the AT 2005, while I recommend that in the Q2U, while I recommend the RE320 to many people and like it on your voice, I believe that those microphones, all of them, are not a very natural sounding microphone. I believe that they all have a unique flavor to them, which I think overall sounds good enough that I'm happy enough to recommend them. But this is a big thing that I always go back to with my Shure SM7B and SM58 and the SM7B to a degree when I tried that, is the Shure microphones tend to be more natural sounding. Out of all the microphones I own, I do believe that my SM58 is the most natural sounding microphone. I used to comment that when you first were actually the one that first introduced me to the AT 2005. So one of the first things I said is that I don't like this. I don't like how it's not natural sounding, because at the time I was using the SM58.
Yes,
anyways,
yes,
right?
You made that comment.
I had comments about that. With time, I heard it on a bunch of different voices. Happy to recommend it. Plus the use case, the flexibility, the USB, hands down recommendation. It's the same thing with the RE320. I think there's a lot of people that love it, but I don't think it sounds natural. I think that it has a very unique profile to it that I can pick out from a lot of different places. And I think that it's a sound that a lot of people prefer, but I don't think it's very natural. Shure tends to, in my opinion, lend more natural. That's the same thing with the SM7B. And I think one of the reasons you didn't like it as much because it sounded more flat, which was more natural. So, and that was my experience comparing it to the BP40 as well. That's my speculation on it. And so that's why I'd like to test this and see if this falls in line with the other two Shure microphones that I've tried, which was the SM7B and the SM58, where I found that compared to similar products, they felt more natural sounding to me.
You know, this whole MV7 thing has brought up a lot of painful memories for me, to be honest with you. I bought the Shure SM7B as my first big boy microphone. It was the first microphone that I upgraded to beyond the Sennheiser E935, was really my first quote unquote big boy or professional microphone. Still love the microphone. It's within arm's reach distance of me. I want to pull it out and just hold it. You know what? I should probably have that as what do you call it? A fiddle thing when you're, something to deal with your hands as you're talking. I should probably just have that on my desk because I love that microphone. Anyway, I got the Shure SM7B. I tried it out with the DBX 286X, and the problem, I have a lot of problems with the Shure SM7B that so a lot of other people don't have. But I did, because the first thing is I could not provide enough gain to it and didn't understand why. And that was really the main reason that I didn't like it, because I heard a lot of distortion in it because I had to drive the gain on the DBX 286X up so much. It just ended up distorting the sound on the low end. I probably had maybe too much bass on there, or low end frequencies on there as well. But I didn't understand why I had to drive it so much until I did that panel at C2E2 in Chicago, and I shared a microphone with Chris, and I didn't understand. Chris projects very well, very loudly, for the lack of a better term, and I project very quietly, which a lot of people that I know personally, and Stephen, you haven't had the opportunity to sit in a room with me, they often complain that I'm too quiet. and when I don't want it, what I'm saying to be overheard with like kids in the next room or whatever, I get even more quieter, and people are like, SP, I can't hear you. This is annoying. So I didn't realize how softly I was projecting until I was doing that panel right next to Chris. And when Chris was talking, I could hear his voice clearly in the speakers in the room. And then when I talked, I actually leaned forward into the microphone and I was talking. I couldn't hear myself. And so I started to project louder, and I actually ended up giving myself a sore throat because I was basically yelling into the microphone just to make sure I was heard in the room. And it was because Chris was so much louder than me. So the poor engineer at the console at the end of the table, he's flipping back and forth in between me and him, trying to make me being heard and trying to make sure Chris wasn't blowing out everything. So that's when I knew that the real reason behind all of the other issues, and I have other issues with the Shure SM7B, but the real issue that I had with the Shure SM7B was because of the lack of projection, and I had to push so much gain into it. I don't like the fact that it doesn't reject sound as well as other microphones do, like the Rode Procaster or the Electro Voice RE320. And the other thing, the flatness of the voice, I actually think I'd be okay with that now. But I would have to add like a Fed header or a cloud lifter into it just to make sure I would get enough gain to it. But then I would be inviting all that ambient sounds in there. Wow, that was a lot of information, but I just wanted to let you know that the MV7 has resurfaced all of that painful memories into me of why I spent $400 on a microphone that I ended up giving away.
Bottom line, Audio-Technica ATR 2100, AT 2005, or Samson Q2U. That's our recommended go-to starting microphones, and we like all three of them.
We do. We own all three of them.
Also in the chat, following up to our previous conversation, because let's keep going about this, because that's why we call it the live chat and Q&A. Betsy was asking about whether I recommended Audacity rather than GarageBand. In the chat, we've got Bangs Naughty Bits giving a few reasons why he prefers not having GarageBand. Number one, saying it's annoying and has effects on it by default, as well as saying it's better in several ways, but has a steeper learning curve. But I only said Audacity because, like, I can speak to Audacity's resources. I don't own a Mac. I can't speak to GarageBand. So I don't know. I honestly have no idea, and I'm out of my depth on that.
Ironically, I was just talking last night about on the GonnaGeek.com show about
available at GonnaGeek.com/show.
about getting a Mac. I was thinking about getting one of the new Mac Minis for my home entertainment center as a streaming computer, but at least that would be the first Mac that I would have in the house that I would be able to use. Full disclosure, my daughter switched over. She's in college right now. She switched over from a Microsoft-based laptop to a MacBook Air last fall when her laptop broke, and all of her friends had a MacBook Air or MacBook Pro. So she really wanted to go all in the Apple architecture. And that was fine because she already had an iPad Air and an iPhone. So I was like, fine. Just so you know, I'm not going to give you any tech support because I don't know, just like you were saying, you didn't have any experience with it. I don't have any experience with it either. But I would like to at least have the OS to play around with and to say, hey, look, I can use GarageBand on here, or I can use Logic Pro, or I can use Audacity, or whatever other program that you can use on a Mac OS, because quite frankly, I'm out of my depth there. I have never used it for podcasting.
Continuing on with our chat, which is again following to the same line of thought here. In the chat, Bangs Naughty Bits brings up a point that we had kind of talked a little bit about, I think on Twitter or something like that. Mac is changing the Intel process or changing the processor that they use away from Intel to a new what's called an M1, and I think that will be interesting to see how well that goes, because there's supposedly going to be an emulation layer involved for the Intel-based applications. If you remember, if you're old enough to remember this, otherwise take our word for this. Way back in my day, Apple did not use Intel processors on their computers. No,
they did not.
And because of that, you had big software problems. It was a big thing when all of a sudden Apple did go over to the Intel processors. It opened up the doors for developers quite a bit in a bunch of different ways, including Windows emulation. But it was really interesting to see. Well, anyways, kind of the reverse, but anyways, that's beside the point. What was really interesting though, was how much that changed for software developers when that happened. And that was a big question mark that people had here when they announced that they were going to be going away from Intel, was what's going to be the change here. And I'm interested to see what happens. The latest Apple update, I believe, did not go as Apple updates usually have. Relatively,
the big Sur.
Yeah, exactly. In the past, Windows doesn't update, everything breaks. You bank on that. You see a Windows update comes up, you go, okay, how's my sound card going to get screwed up this time? Traditionally, Mac has been pretty reliable. Update comes out, you're relatively okay. But this last one was plagued with software problems. So I'm a little hesitant here to see what happens with the new Macs as far as podcasting software might integrate that's already on there. But time will tell. I'm sure there's bound to be some hiccups, and there's lots of Mac users out there, huge user base for creative applications, including podcasting. So I think we're in a much different position now than we were years ago before Apple made the switch to Intel, because back then there was not as many people using Macs for this sort of process. So the support wasn't there, but now you've got a huge user base doing creative activities on there. If something goes wrong, hopefully it'll be a lot quicker to get fixed.
I know a lot of the professional podcasters that I know that stream and use Apple products. They're very hesitant to move forward with both the M1 chips and the Big Sur update. Matter of fact, there has been a noted black screen of death on some MacBook Pro units. It's very specific. It's like 2 specific models, so it's not the entire MacBook Pro line. But I would check into that before you upgrade, if you're thinking about upgrading to the Big Sur, and make sure you're not one of those 2 models. Apparently, Apple's working on a solution. I don't know if that solution is out yet or not, but there have been some updates that have been going fine, and some you get the black screen of death, and there's no way to recover from it. And that would be a big concern for me. The other thing on the chips, the M1 chips, there's a lot of hesitancy to move forward with that. A lot of people want Apple to get their feet underneath them and get a generation or 2 of the chip underneath them before they actually go ahead and update. And the other thing is these the laptops that they're talking about are 13-inch laptops. The MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro 13-inch, they're only 13-inch screens. And then the other one is the Mac Mini, which is not tied to a screen. It's its own little pockets. It's a set-top box basically now, but it is a computer in of itself. So those are the smaller laptop versions of the Mac architecture. And they started with the M1 chip with there. I think when they release the next generation of stuff next year, it'll probably be with an M2 chip. I'm just thinking that. So they're getting their feet underneath them with this M1 chip, and all the rest of the line still use the Intel chips, at least for now. And then they will go from there. Stephen, we had a comment over on Twitch from Damien asking us if we have used our ZDM1 microphones at all. And yes, we both have one. But Stephen?
I unboxed it to see that it was something discolored under the foam, but there might be an unboxing video that shows up if I get around to it or not, because I did the unboxing video, but we'll see which of us get around to it first. But yeah, there was something discolored on it. I don't know, but I haven't used it yet. No.
Interesting. Now I haven't unboxed mine yet either, and this is the second issue that I have personally heard of some stuff coming out of the box. Not great with that, so it's not boding all that well. Not with the microphone. It's obvious to those that listened or watch Bandrew over on Podcastage. He took the headphones out and they were literally hanging by like 3 different threads. They were crushed.
Really?
So he's like, I'm not going to review these because they're broke, and I don't review headphones anyway. But he just made a point to saying that they were broke, and he wasn't going to make a comment either way because they were broke. But he said they were broke. So,
well, I'm a little worried now, I have to say, but
hey, I mean, it's a microphone. We got it. We'll use it, and it'll be up to Zoom to correct their issues with manufacturing and shipping, I guess, and packaging in the future if they want to stay competitive in the market.
do you have something else that you want to talk about as I quickly try to pull up a screenshot of the
Sure.
discolored for
Talking
our
Talking
video?
about new microphones, I in the last 2 weeks since we recorded, I heard that there was yet another new microphone, the Yellowtech IXM microphone. It's been marketed to podcasters as kind of a wireless interview microphone with 3 different capsules. And I won't go farther than that because it's $800. So I'm not going to go ahead and get one to test because we're dealing with hobby podcasters that find it a stretch to do a $200 microphone. So if you're dealing with a $800 microphone, that is an issue there. So Stephen, you're blocking yourself out with a Endfire microphone right there.
Yes, that's the ZDM one for those of you who are following on the video side of things. You can see right about the center there's a spot, and that was there when I took off the foam. So
I can see that.
It's something, the audio listener, you don't really need to go check this out if you don't want, but it was there. It was there when I took that off, so I wasn't sure what that was. And I think there was something else, actually, now that you say that. I think there was something else during the unboxing, but I can't say for sure. I remembered the spot. There might have been something else, but I did a few unboxings when I did that. I had like 3 that I needed to do all together, so I might be mixing up things, but I did remember that.
Okay.
As for the Yellowtech, keep in mind with the Yellowtech, that will be an interesting thing to follow because they also make really awesome mic arm stands that are out of a hobbyist price point budget, the average hobbyist price point budget. So they're
it's
good,
professional grade equipment,
but it's professional grade equipment, and apparently is phenomenal. However, not within a hobbyist budget. Maybe the mic's the same. I don't know. Last thing that I want to mention today is just a little tease for something that I'll probably talk about in the future. I mentioned it on last week's Better Podcasting main show, the Sennheiser IE40 Pro in-ear monitors. There's an unboxing video on the Gonna Geek Gear YouTube channel. It's a little test that I wanted to do. I saw a sale and I had a weak moment, and I'm like, I'm going to buy those because I want to compare. Because I use the Shure SE215 in-ear monitors. They're budget basic price point, and I've been really happy with them. I try not to get too extravagant with these sort of things because it is a hobby, and I look for something that's good but is not super expensive. And that's where I came up with the Shures, because the Shure SE215s, from what I read, they were far better than the stuff that was like half the price and seemed like it was a lot more comfortable. And I've never tried the cheaper ones, but I know a lot of the things that people have complained about with the cheaper ones, I don't have issues with, like comfortableness and things like that. So I thought, okay, well, I've used those for a little while, and the sale came up on the Sennheiser IE40 Pros, and I wanted to give them a bit of a try, and I plan to do a review in the future. As bottom line, at this moment, I prefer the SE215s over the IE40s. I think the biggest win that the IE40s have is they seem a little clearer overall. I think the high end is a little bit, picks up a little, or I don't know what you would say. You hear a little bit more because the high end sounds a little bit clearer than the Shure SE215s. The low end's muddier. But, you know, that sort of nuance in the upper end that sometimes is important when you're monitoring, I think is a little bit better on the IE40s. But the bottom line is that the Shure pieces that are available, the actual Shure products, like the tips and the different types of tips to fit different ear sizes and things like that, they're much more readily available for Shure versus the Sennheiser. I prefer foam tips for my in-ear monitors, and I can't find Sennheiser in-ear monitor tips that are in the size that I need for my ear canals. And as such, I'm stuck looking for generic tips, and I've tried a couple different ones, and they vary in quality because of that. Like this, I have two different ones that I've picked up. They look similar, but they sound a little bit different, and they have a couple things that I think will hurt the longevity. Like they don't have the little mesh filter in there, which I will let you use your imagination on why I think that you need to have that for the tips on your in-ear monitors, or you're probably going to wreck your in-ear monitors eventually. So because I can't find Sennheiser tips that I think are vastly available for the masses and a bunch of different preference and ear canals, I think that this is going to affect that win on it. Like they sound better to me, but they might sound worse to somebody else because they can't find a uniform sound fit, like a uniform product that will create the same sound for a bunch of different ear shapes and things like that. So I think you lose that win as such. And overall, the quality feels mostly the same. You know, one part of the cord feels better on the Shure SE215s. The other part feels better on the IE40s. But I just think that the SE215s, because of the fact that you've got accessories that are made by Shure that are available. So if you prefer the rubber tips, you can easily find them made by Shure. If you prefer the foam tips, you can find them made by Shure. If you like those little plastic cones, you can find them. As well, like I did when I broke my cord after 2 or 3 years of use, I was able to go and get a replacement cord for it. I at this point here, the 215s, the Shure 215s are the clear winner for me. And I kind of regret a little bit buying the IE40s. Not to mention looks. If you're into looks as well, the SE215s are clear. You can only get complete clear look on the higher end Sennheiser in-ear monitors. So the couple times I used them, it was really obvious to me that I was using them because the clear wire on the Shures kind of hide it a little bit if you're doing anything video. But I just from a functionality perspective, I don't know. That's where I'm sitting right now with it. I'll probably do a full review in the future, so you'll hear a little double content. I'll probably do that on the main Better Podcasting show. But I teased that last week on the Better Podcasting main show. I posted the unboxing video, so I wanted to just address my initial thoughts right now. And I at this point, have no reason I would recommend the IE40s over the SE215s.
I kind of have a unique situation I've learned with any in-ear stuff is my one ear. Well, first of all, my ear canals are both pretty large, but one's a little bit larger than the other. So I need like the largest I can get in one ear and then a size that I can't get in my other ear. And that makes it a little sporty to keep the little earbuds in my ear. So just another reason that I'm finding not to go with the little earbuds. I do have the Apple AirPod Pros right now that I've been using, but the one in my right ear keeps on falling out, and that's the ear I have trouble with anyway. So I don't know. If I can find a extra large set of cones for that or not, we'll see. I wanted to just have a short update. I've been talking about this quite a bit, and I realized I stopped a couple of weeks ago. The big wall of water behind me, the outside construction on that with the siding, the water vapor barrier, and the windows is complete. And we had a couple of rather large storms since it was complete, and I have no leakage from that, but I still have 2 other repairs I need to do. I have to have the foundation patched where it cracked because the water hydrostatic pressure was enough against the foundation. It cracked the foundation. So I need to have that patched. And yes, I've tried the inside thing and it didn't entirely work. So I need to go outside now. So that will have to be done. And then once that is done, I will have to do the drywall, which was damaged on the wall behind me. And that will mean I need to move out of the podcast studio here. So I don't know when that's going to be. Could be next fall sometime, could be the year after, to be honest, because it's just a lot to get done with all these repairs. But it is coming in the future. I will not be in the studio right now, but I just wanted to cap that off, at least for 2020. The exterior is fixed. I'm no longer hemorrhaging water. I no longer have a waterfall in my wall behind me whenever it rains. And so I'm safe and dry for now, but there's still additional repairs that need to be done on my house. Just want to close that off for right now. And Steven, I think that's it for this week. I mean, okay.
We have one more question in the chat. One more question in the chat from Betsy. Thanks again, Betsy, for coming by. Saying, do I need a pop filter or windscreen? I would just say get one of those. I always mix them up. The pop filter windscreens. Yeah, I always think the right one, and I say the wrong one first.
Right.
Always just get yourself one of those windscreens, which is essentially the foam piece that goes over your microphone that slides on there. There's a variety of different ones that are out there. There are better qualities, but just start with one that you can find, or just go ahead and just wear your mask when you're podcasting, because that sounds super great, right? Just wear your mask.
No, I'm not going to wear my mask when I podcast. Ironically, I can't believe I'm going to tell this story here. So the girls were home last week and they wanted to watch Grey's Anatomy, and they said, Dad, come watch Grey's Anatomy with us. And I was like, no, I don't want to watch Grey's Anatomy. And they were like, we want to spend time with you. So I watched Grey's Anatomy, and it was the season premiere episode, which was interesting. And from a podcasting standpoint, this was interesting to me. So I'm glad I was actually forced to watch it. What they did is they took scenes from last year that they were actually filming when they had to cease production in early 2020, and they intermixed that with new scenes that they did. And it was a visual issue. The girls even pointed it out to me, because the scenes that were shot before, nobody was wearing a mask, nobody was wearing PPE or anything like that in the hospital, and they were just out in the open without anything, right? And then there were the scenes that were produced with full PPE and people wearing masks and that sort of thing. So it was interesting how they pulled it off. But if you go back to early 2020, and how we were complaining about how all these late night show hosts and whatever were doing live, and we're like, we've been doing better than that for years. Why can't they get it right, sort of thing? So I'm going to give them a little slack, especially because their solution was rather unique. The doctors and nurses, which were in full PPE, which included complete head coverings, they actually had microphones in the helmets. And it was obvious that they were using that microphone to record their voice, but it was better than putting a boom arm in front of them and having to go through the helmet, right? Because that wouldn't have worked.
Yeah. Well, I guess you'll just have to make sure that you take over production for that show, SP.
No, I'm not going anywhere near Grey's Anatomy.
Well, for episode 20 of Better Podcasting Live Chat, I'm Stephen John Drew saying, wow, we're at 20 already? I thought we were at 21.
Yes, it's 21. It's episode 21. Thank you very much for everybody listening, and we'll see everybody in 2 weeks. Bye.
Bye. Just in case I want to edit that. See if I feel like editing.
You're going to edit. I mean, I didn't even discuss the edit point that I made you do last week.
Oh, yeah. That was a good... Yeah, we should have talked about that. Oh, well.
Well, we'll talk about that next time.
So, for episode 21 of Better Podcasting Live Chat, I'm Stephen John Drew saying, wow, 21. Guess you can drink now, SP.
I can't believe that we used to do that gag. Yeah, see everybody in 2 weeks. It was great seeing you this time.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for checking out another episode of Better Podcasting. You can find the full back catalog of Better Podcasting at betterpodcasting.com. If you're into geeky podcasts, please check out the other podcasts on the Gonna Geek Network at GonnaGeekNetwork.com. This show was produced and edited by Stephen John Drew of Gonna Geek Productions. Voice work was done by L.W. Salinas. Thanks again for listening or watching, and we hope to see you again next week.
All right, thanks everybody for coming on by. We hope you had a fun time. And the next week on Tuesday will be our Better Podcasting regular show. And then the week after that will be Better Podcasting Live Chat again. And then we continue that rotation. But we're almost in December and it'll get all messed up.
It will, because aren't we doing a back-to-back regular Better Podcasting with our annual gear shows?
Yeah, but I think we'll probably try to squeeze in also a better podcasting live chat just because otherwise it'll be a really big gap. I don't know. We'll have to see.
All right.
Even if it's, I don't know. We'll have to have a look at the schedule. I was thinking about that because we always take a break. We offset it. That leaves this show as having like nearly a month gap if we don't. So I don't know.
Yeah, 'cause it's every other week. Yeah, I get it. Okay.
So we'll have to see. All right. Thanks everybody. Have yourself a wonderful night and hope you have yourself a good evening and come back on you back Thursday?
Right now I am. Yeah. We'll see if that holds.
Potentially Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9. Are you still doing that?
Yeah.
Back.
Yeah, we haven't officially moved it yet, but we will be moving the time. So 9 p.m. Eastern. We'll probably be moving it up at least an hour.
Legends of the Shield podcast, and then Gonna Geek Show is next Monday. Bye.